Hello everyone. Welcome to this demo on workflow and how to apply all the knowledge that you have so far in Photoshop into one image in particular. So we have covered a lot from editing images all the way from Camera Raw, importing them into Photoshop, and then using adjustments, mask, clipping mask. We have effects, type, there's a lot of stuff that we have covered. Now, we're not going to do everything in this image, but we're going to do a basic workflow that will help you remind the kind of stuff that you want to do to an image. We did a little bit of retouching on portraits also. This image we're not going to go into that because it's a landscape image, but there are some things that we did on a portrait that we could do on a landscape, and that's why I wanted to use this image instead of a portrait or a person. Okay, so the first thing that you have to think about are the things that we have covered in the class and the things that I've been trying to emphasize. And the first one is to always duplicate your background, and that is the Command J shortcut. Okay, and usually by default, I try to write reto on this layer, so I know that I'm going to be retouching that one, and this one is just the background. Sometimes I just rename it and I don't do anything to it, but I just like to rename stuff instead of having it untitled or copy, or it makes it cleaner and it's easier for you to navigate later on. So that's the first thing that I do. The thing that I want to talk about now is using the adjustments in blending modes, so that way you can affect something in particular instead of applying it overall as a normal layer. So let's talk a little bit about that. I'm going to start with the curves. Okay, so as soon as you do your curves, I'm going to move the properties out so you can see them. I'm going to put them right here, and I'm going to bring my layers also over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to basically adjust this image. The first thing that I do is kind of like global adjustment, and that's what I'm going to be looking at this image right now is the density. Do I need to darken it? Do I need to brighten it? Do I need to do any contrast changes? And that's what this one is going to be. So I'm going to put global, and I'm going to write density so I can remember what it is. Okay, now as soon as I do that, usually you will start playing with this, but since I know that what I want to do is basically lighten it up or darken up this image, I'm going to change this blending mode here. So let's highlight that so you can see it. This right here, I'm going to change it to luminosity. Okay, now what that's going to do is it's going to affect only the luminosity of that adjustment and not affect the color. Okay, so now is where we're starting to really kind of bring down to the basic of what really we need to be adjusting on this image in particular, or this layer, let's say. And that's what I'm going to be focused on. I'm going to be focusing only on the luminosity of that layer and not affect the color or anything out, because if I leave it on normal, it will affect a little bit the color, the saturation and the contrast and all that stuff. And I don't want that. Now I'm going to explain why in a little bit. So what I do here is just basically look at my image and decide, it was pretty well exposed because I processed it through Camera Raw before coming in here. And that's something else about the workflow. Usually I do most of my adjustment in Camera Raw, and then I bring it into Photoshop to do fine tuning. Okay, so that is a good habit to have, because that's where you can really get the most out of your images. Once you bring it to Photoshop, you might have some limits if you have blown out areas that you cannot bring detail back. In this case, this image was a little bit blown out on purpose because it's the sun right behind it. And I wanted to get some detail on this tree. If I actually expose a little bit more of the sky, then this would have been too dark. So I had to jeopardize what I really wanted. And in this case, I really wanted to highlight the tree itself. But we can still darken this part of the sky a little bit. So I'm going to play along with that in a second. So I'm going to just darken it a tad to make it look nicer. And that's basically what that one is going to do. You can also make some contrast by adding, we have covered this before, by clicking here and bringing it down, and then you can push the highlight up, and that adds some more contrast. Let's see the before and after. Kind of makes it a little bit, get a little bit of more oomph to it. Okay, so that's the the contrast, which I think is a little bit too much, but I'm going to go with it just because I want you to be able to see it. And if I don't do it enough, it might not be visible in the video. So I'm going to add a little bit of contrast there to that one. Now, after I do that one, I do another one for color. So I'm going to go ahead again and click here on another curve. Now I have, let's make this a little bit bigger so you can see everything I have. I have the background, the copy that I did. I have the global density. And now this one, I'm going to rename it to color. Okay. Now, so I can remember that this is color, I'm going to write it, but I'm also going to change this blending mode of that layer all the way down here to color. And the same reason I changed this one, so I could adjust the brightness of the image without affecting the color. And this one, I want the opposite. I want to affect the color, but not the density. So I'm going to go here and I change it to color. And I go to this properties panel right here. Let's move it to the side. And where it says RGB, I'm going to go to the red. Okay, so now if I take away red or add red, right, it's going to be mainly only the color. Not mainly, it's going to be only the color because I have color set up as my blending mode. It's not going to make the image brighter or darker. Doesn't matter how much you push it. It's just going to be the color. Okay, and that's the cool thing about this blending mode adjustment, to modify the things that you want, how the image should look. On this one, it's not going to be touched because on this one, it's just going to be the color. So I'm going to quickly see what I can get here. I want a little bit of warmth, so I might leave it there. Now I'm wondering if I should put a little bit more yellow just for the fun of it. Yeah. So, it's a sunset, so I kind of want it warmer actually. So just making it a tad warmer. It was a little bit blue. Let's see what happens with the green. Whoop. Let's try taking away some of the green. Let's leave it there, see what happens. So, I'm making it on purpose really warm. And the reason is because it's right at the sunset, right? So it should be a little bit warmer than if you shoot like at noon. So I'm exaggerating that warmth feeling because I want to create this cozy feeling on the image. So now that I have that, that's basically these are global adjustments. And you can make other global adjustments. In this one, I'm going to keep just these two, and I'm going to add one more, and I'm going to show you what that one is. This one is basically going to be the main contrast. I did a little bit of contrast on that one, but I'm going to write here contrast. Okay. And this is the way that I usually do it when I don't want to be guessing. Now, sometimes I don't care that much about an image that I don't really do this one. But if I'm going to print it and I want to make sure that I have detail on the highlights and detail on the shadows, I would basically do this that I'm doing right now. So I'm going to change it again to luminosity, okay, because I want only to affect the contrast. I don't want to change my color that I already have here by altering it with this one on top of it. So I want to make sure it's only on luminosity. So what I'm going to do here is on this window right here, I'm going to select these little eyedroppers here, the black and the white, to set it up as my brightest and darkest point. Now, by default, they're either at 100%. Let me start with this one just so you can see how it looks. Here where it says B, let me highlight that area. This B stands for brightness, and right now it's at 100%. So if I go ahead and click on this and click on an image on an area, it's going to say, oh, you want that at 100% brightness? Then boom, and it raises everything to that. So that's too bright, right? And if you start guessing and try to like where that should be, you don't want to do that, okay? So I'm going to show you a trick on how to get to the brightest spot and the darkest spot. And to do that, we're going to go to threshold right here on the adjustments. And this is just as an aid. I know it looks crazy. This is not what we want. This is just to help us find that brightest spot and the darkest spot. So I'm going to go here, okay, to this slider, and I'm going to go all the way here. And I'm looking to find what is the brightest spot. And it seems like if I go all the way here, somewhere up here seems to be the brightest spot, because as I go all the way, that's the last one that stays. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to zoom in to that area. Okay, so once I'm here, I'm guessing somewhere here is going to be the brightest spot. Now, I have my eyedropper selected, okay? And it's this one right here. Let me show you right here, okay? So that one, you're going to select it, and then you're going to hold shift. By default, it just looks like an eyedropper. If I hold shift, it has kind of like a target symbol added to it. If I let go the shift, it goes away. So I'm going to hold it down, click on some area that you know that is white. So I'm going to click here. As soon as you click that, that's all you needed to do. Now let's do the opposite. Now we go all the way. Let's zoom out so we can see it. There we go. And we want the opposite. Now we want what is the darkest spot of the image. It seems like it's somewhere here. So I'm going to zoom in there. And let's navigate there. Okay, so it seems like the darkest spot is somewhere here. I'm going to do the same thing. Remember, you have to hold shift with the eyedropper and then click. And now you have your target area right there. Now you don't need this anymore. That's what we needed, this layer of the threshold, just to do those two targets. Now we can actually trash it to the trash can. We don't need it anymore. Okay, we just wanted to find what was the darkest spot. You see that it was this. If I would have been guessing, I would have, maybe got an area that it wasn't the darkest spot, but now we know. Okay, for sure that this one right here was the brightest one and this one right here was the darkest one. Now that we have that, I'm going to go to the brightest, the white eyedropper. I'm going to double click. Okay. I'm going to change this brightness. I'm going to change it to 95. Okay. And what I'm telling the computer right now is that this tool, when I use it and I click, it's going to change that point, or based on that point, the image, as if that is going to be 95%. So nothing is going to be completely washed out or blown out because it's going to have a little bit of detail, right? This is the pure white. If you see this little window right here, this is what it was before. This is what it's going to be now. The reason I do that is when you're printing images, I know that we're not printing in the lab right now, but when you print images, if you grab a paper and you look at it at an angle with the light, you'll have these blobs of areas that don't have any ink because it was blown out. So what I'm preventing here is making sure that there's ink basically in the entire image and there's no holes where there's no ink. If I would have printed this, these clouds would have been holes that you basically see the white of the paper. Okay, and I don't want that. I want a little bit of texture there. And to be honest, when you're looking at it, if you're looking at it from the front, you won't be able to notice it that much. But if you go at an angle and there's light, you will definitely see it, and it's really distracting. Okay, so that's why I want to make sure that you do this. Now you press OK. It's going to ask you, do you want to set this as your default colors? I'm going to set yes because I usually do that. And then the reason is because I keep using it. You don't have to set it as your default. You can actually just do it for once. But I think it's good to do that because there are rare scenarios that you want to have it pure white. And in that case, then you can just rechange it by just double clicking again. You can change it as many times as you want. Now I'm going to do the same with the black. I'm going to double click the black. And then this one I had already changed it before. Usually is at 0. Okay. But I used it recently, so I had it at 5%. And now I press OK. And it's not going to ask me because it was already at 5. But basically one of these is at 95 and the other one is at 5%. Now what happens is if I click on the white one and I navigate, let me turn this off, and navigate here, you need to zoom in. You can't do it from far away. You really need to get close so you know that you're clicking right on the middle of it. And you get the white one and then you click there. You can see that it did it a little bit darker, right? It kind of like slowly like brought a little bit of darkness here. You don't see it if you look at it from looking at before. You have to look at the before and after to really notice it. Now I'm going to do the same thing but with the black. I'm going to grab the black and then go to the black and then click right here. Now what that's going to do is basically creating contrast on your image based on the highest point and the darkest point without you guessing. Usually when you're doing the curve and you're trying to guess, oh, it needs to be brighter, the highlights are darker, you're kind of guessing. Here you're basically doing it by the numbers, which makes all the the guessing go away. Now we can see what that looks like. It's very subtle, so I'm going to turn the eye off and on. So that was before and this is after. It's actually very subtle, but when you print it, the difference will be noticeable. And then if you want to go and adjust the global one, you can still do it because those points that we adjusted are basically at the end of the spectrum. So if you move anything on the middle here, it won't affect those points, okay? Unless you do very dramatically. So I wanted to show you these three ways of adjusting globally your image. Now that we did those three, I'm going to click on the top one, shift, click on the last one, and I'm going to click on this little folder right here, okay? And when I do that, it's going to group them, and I'm going to write here by double clicking, global adjustments, okay? So these are my global adjustments. So if I hide them, this is how it was before, this is how it now, okay? So those are global. Now I'm going to work on my regional adjustment. So to do that, I'm first going to grab this tool right here and add a new blank layer. And I'm going to change it to overlay. I'm going to do another one. I'm also going to change it to overlay. And one of them is going to be, let's say, dodging. And the other one can be burning. I have done these where like I have one where it's dodging and burning, and you can do that too. If it's something quick, you can just have them both in one layer. The reason why I like to separate them is that I can also have the possibility later on if I want to lower the opacity of one of them only and not affect the other things. So I usually, if I something that I care, I will separate them, and I will also add one for color. Okay, and let's make sure that this is also an overlay. That one's an overlay. Okay, so this is basically the same thing that we did with the portraits when we were retouching and we were adding, some makeup and some details on the face, on the eyebrows and things like that. It's basically the same thing, dodging and burning. So now I can have my brush selected and let's make it a little bit, let's zoom in a little bit. Let's make it a little bit bigger with my right bracket key. And what you want to do with this is basically you want to paint your image. Now you have to remember that you have to have your default colors here, black and white, because that's what you're going to be using. So what I'm going to do is on my keyboard, I'm going to press the letter D and it goes to the default. Okay, now I have black on the foreground. Okay, and then I have white on the background. So the one that I have in the foreground is the one that I paint with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my opacity is very low. I'm going to start very low. Let's start 16 or 15. It's fine. It's very low, but I don't know if you will see it that much. But I want to go little by little because I don't want to affect my image too much. And the first thing I'm going to do is basically burn. So I'm going to go burning the sky. I'm going to make it bigger. Okay, and I'm going to start painting here a little bit. So you can get a sense of what this is going to do. Okay, so it's hard to tell at the beginning, but you will see it in a second. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to make sure that my tree stands out, the sky looks nice, and let's do the before and after. So that was before, and that's my burning. I have to go into the trees here and adjust that because it's painting a little bit the trees. I did my brush too big, but I wanted to go quicker. But that's easy to fix because you can go here and you can erase it. You can add a mask now also if you want, right? And you paint with black and you can take it away from areas. So if I want to take it away from here, I can do that. And from here, okay. So you can work in conjunction with the mask and what we have learned to kind of create the best scenario that you want. And this is really cool because you can also lower the opacity if you feel like you overdid it. Okay, so you have like three things working together here. You have a layer that's empty that you're painting on it and it has the blending mode. You have the mask that you can cancel some areas. And then on top of that, you also have the opacity that you can play with. So this is a really powerful technique to adjusting your images. The same thing you can do for dodging. If you want to make something lighter, then you add white. And remember, you're not really painting with white. It's because the layers and overlay is making it brighter. So I can go here, and if I want to make my trunk of the tree stand out a little bit more, or these areas here that are darker, Okay, so let's see how that looks. I'm kind of exaggerating it, but you get the idea, right? It's almost like they pop a flash and you can now see it. Um, so this is pretty cool. So that's my dodging. This one is my burning. Okay, and you can also add color. So if I want, let's say, what would be something interesting here? Let's say I want my sky to be really yellow. I'm gonna move this slider or orangey looking, something like that. And I can make my brush big. Let's zoom out a little bit so I can really paint. And now I can go here and it's adding that color on my sky. Okay. Now, because the layer is an overlay and I'm in a low opacity, it's adding it little by little. Okay. But you'll be able to see the difference, right? That's without it and that's with it. So you can also like get something warmer or cooler. That's usually when I'm dealing with, like, let's say I'm doing a studio shot and with the background and all that, I might want to have, like, let's say the person or the model have like more warmth in an area of the face and more cool in another area, or in a location. I want, let's say, you're shooting like on the shade and you notice that there's some blue rays on the image. You can actually warm them up by just doing this, adding an empty layer, overlay, and then paint with a color to warm up those areas. Or you can do the opposite. You can cool an area if it's too warm. That works really well when you have like shots that have like both, part of the image is on the shade and part of the image is on like the sun. This part in the sun is going to be really warm. The shade is going to be really blue or cool. So you can kind of like paint, with the brush in the areas that you want to fix to kind of neutralize that. So this is really cool things that you can do. And these is what we call regional adjustments. So you select all of these, you group them, and then you write regional. I did a caps there, but it's okay. So regional adjustment. So those are the two things that you do. Now, let's assume that, this looks pretty awful. I actually don't like that color that I did. So I'm going to delete it. I think it looks nicer with the blue. But I just wanted to show you that. Now that I have these two, there are a couple of things that I do to my images sometimes. I have two more steps. There's one that involves sharpening your image. There's one that involves adding noise to your image. I think that the noise sometimes gives more sharpness and it looks nicer to the image. Now, I'm not like doing it for an effect. So I don't want noise that you can see it. It's very subtle what we're going to add. Okay, so to do that, I press Option while I click here. So I can change the blending mode to overlay. And it's going to ask me, do you want to fill the neutral overlay neutral color 50% gray? And I'm going to say yes, I want that. So you want to make sure that that check mark right here at the bottom is on, and then you can go ahead and do okay. The difference by doing that, by doing option clicking here, is that now it's 18% gray, so it's not empty. Okay, and I'm going to add the noise to that layer. Okay, that is gray, so it's going to sit on top of everything. But I'm not going to do that yet. I kind of got ahead of myself, but I want to do one layer because I want to do the sharpening first so I can see how the noise behaves with the sharpening. It doesn't really matter if you do it before and after. I have done it both ways. We can go ahead and do the noise now so you can see the difference. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to select layer 1, go to filter, noise, add noise. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in on my image because I want to see how that looks. Let's go to an area that has some detail, like here on the branches. Okay, so somewhere here. We're looking at this area right here. Right now it's at 3%. Let's do it more. I'm going to do 5 just so you can notice it. Let's zoom in a little bit more. Okay, so right now that's at 5%. I'm going to hide it. Right? So that's how it was before. And this is at 5%. I wouldn't do 5% because I'm starting to notice it. But that's kind of what you want. You want like that edginess because that gives the illusion that the image is sharper. So I'm probably going to do like 3%. Yeah, that looks nice. And then the reality is that you're not going to see your image this close, right? If you do Command Option 0, it shows you at 100%. So you don't notice it here, right? So when you print it, you won't be able to see it. But it gives that illusion that the image is sharper because it's not just like that flat. It gives you some texture. So that's why I like to do this, and I try it different ways. Some images need more, some images need less. So that's why I still go in. There's not like a formula that you can do to all your images. You have to go in and see how the image behaves. Um, so that looked pretty good. Now, the last step that I do is sharpening. Okay. So to do a sharpen, right, I don't want to do it all the way here on this layer. I usually do it at the end. That's the last thing I do because depending on if your image is going to be for web, you want to over sharpen it a little bit. If it's for printing, you don't want to over sharpen it. So depending on what my output is going to be, that's going to guide how much sharpening I'm going to push in my image. I'm the type of person that I don't push my images a lot in sharpening because I think they start looking weird. But I always sharpen them enough that it improves the images, but it doesn't make it obvious that I sharpened it. Okay. So the last step that I do, and this is why I leave it for the end, is I press Command Option Shift E while I was selecting on the top layer, on layer 1. What that shortcut does, Command Option Shift E, is it merges all these layers into one. Okay, so basically this layer right here is all the layers underneath. Now there are several ways that you can sharpen your images. There's actually a lot of different ways that you can sharpen. I'm going to show you the 3 that I feel like they're the most popular. So the first one is you go to Filter, you go to Sharpen, and you can see that there's a bunch here. Unsharp Mask works pretty well. Smart Sharpen is probably from these the ones that I end up using the most. So I'm going to show you that one. So Smart Sharpen will basically decide, kind of identify the edges of things and sharpen the edges only, versus other of the sharpening tools kind of sharpen the entire image. So that's not what you want. You don't want to sharpen something that's supposed to be flat like the sky, right? Because then it's going to start looking grainy and weird. So this one works pretty well, because it gives you that nice contrast at the edges of things that gives the illusion of sharpening, but doesn't look, bad. Now my computer is being very slow suddenly. I guess I have too many apps open. Okay, there we go. Oh, still a little bit frozen. Okay, seems like apparently this file is suddenly too big and I have too many apps and my Safari open too, so that doesn't help. So let's see if I can close a couple. Okay, finally, it's loaded. So now that we are here, it seems like this is way too much. You don't want to do 100 and something. I usually keep it between 100 or lower. And let's zoom in so you can see how that looks. So if we go here, you can see in this area right here, let me highlight it. So if we look here, I'm looking here because I can see more the edges of things. If you look here, it's kind of hard. But if you look in this dark area and then the green, you can kind of see what the preview does. So that was without it, and that's with it. It sharpens it significantly, right? So you can do a really good job of making the image sharper. Now you have to be aware that sharpening is an illusion. It basically adds contrast to the edges of things. So it makes it look like it's sharper. It doesn't mean that if you just bring an image that's blurry, you're just going to make it sharp. It just doesn't work like that. It basically identifies the edges and then makes them, look more contrasty at the edges. So it gives that illusion that it's sharper. If you have an image that's soft and you try to sharpen it, there's no edges, so it won't sharpen. Well, it will do a really bad job sharpening. So the amount is the most important thing. The radius, I usually keep it at 1. Right now it's at 1.4. That you don't want to go too high. This depends more of how big your file is. You might, the bigger the camera resolution, then you need to slide it maybe a little bit more, but not too much. I usually keep it around 1. And if you want to reduce the noise, you can push it. This image doesn't have noise, so I'll leave it there. So the amount, for this one, I probably would do somewhere around 70 or 80, something like that. I think that's a little bit too much. I'm really, careful with the sharpening. Like that for me looks fine. That's one way, and you just press OK and it sharpens it. Now, another one that I have used a lot is filter. You have, well, high pass is good, but I have to duplicate my layer first. So high pass, it used to be a good way of doing it. I just want to show you a couple of different ways. So this one with the high pass, it's a little bit, old school. So maybe I shouldn't show you that one. But the way that it works is you go to filter, other, and then you apply the high pass. And it looks like this. So it looks kind of weird. It used to be the best way of sharpening, in my opinion, because you get a preview of how it will look. So what you want is basically to lower this until you see edges, but no ghosting. So like, remember when we started, it was kind of like ghosty looking like that. That's not good. That's not what you want. You want basically to just see the edges. So what it's going to get sharpened is whatever is defined. So that's why I like this tool before they introduce some of the other ones, because this one I can really tell by looking at this, even though it looks all gray, but you can see like, oh yeah, this is going to be sharpened. So you can kind of play with this one. Let's say if I'm going to exaggerate it a little bit so it's noticeable. So let's do a little bit higher so you can see it. Okay, let's say I want it like that. And I press OK. Now it will still look weird, but that's why I thought it might be a little bit confusing to show you this, because there's easier ways now. But now that I have this layer with that, I can go to the blending mode and put overlay. And now it looks sharper. So I'm going to show you the before and after. So that's before, that's after. It sharpens really well, right? Some people, these days don't use this one because it's kind of like from previous Photoshop versions, but I still think like it's one of the most powerful because it gives you that preview. So I'm going to trash this one. So that's another one. Another way that you can sharpen that's been really popular these days, because I think it's good, is if you go to filter, you can go to camera raw filter with that layer selected, and you can basically open camera raw within Photoshop and go to the sharpening tool here, and you can sharpen directly that layer from here. Isn't that cool? I think that's pretty cool. And you can hold option and slide the mask and then see where it's going to be sharpened. Now this works really good. I really like it a lot. Now the problem is if it's something quick that you're doing, I don't like to go away from Photoshop onto this other camera raw software to do my sharpening. So I only do it in special occasions, the go to camera raw. Most of the time, if there's something quick that I just need for a website, I just do it right here in Photoshop to save a little bit of time, so I don't have to open a new window. So those are three ways that you can sharpen. So that's the last thing that you do. The main thing I wanted to show you today is that you have to have some kind of workflow. And what I show you right now is basically kind of how I approach my images. Let me open this and that. I basically open the images, duplicate it, do any retouching. We didn't do any on this on purpose because we already covered that. But after that, then I started working with my global adjustment. So I start from globally adjusting my image, okay, and I group that in a group layer. And then I have the regional ones that I do of dodging and burning or color to my image, and I group that into another. Now, right now I don't have a lot, but some images I have a bunch of like layers because I'm doing different things, particularly for the regional adjustments. If there's a lot of areas I'm focusing on, I might have a layer just for the foreground and just for the background. So I want to keep all those layers separate, so I don't have to be, if I do a mistake going to like, the layer and it's like everything is in one. So that'll be bad. And then lastly, adding some noise and some sharpening so your image is finally done. So this is a cool workflow. I know that there are a lot of professionals that follow something similar to this. And you can, the main thing that I want to talk about is you want to follow whatever works for you and decide what is your workflow. Because if you open an image and you're like, oh, what am I going to do to this one? Oh, maybe it needs this. Or maybe like if you have a workflow, you're not going to forget things that it might need your image, right? So that way it's like, okay, what does it need globally? What does it need regionally? Do I need to sharpen it? Do I need to do noise? And then that way you don't forget. And once you get in the habit, it's just going to become natural for you to do these adjustments. So that's basically kind of putting, together all the things that we have covered. We didn't cover that much masking, but it's here, and we didn't do pen tool and other things. But I wanted to put everything on perspective. Like now that we know all the skills, it's like, how do you put them together into and work on an image or into a design? So when you work in the poster, you can also follow these kind of like, workflow of deciding of how do you want to approach like the overall poster. What is the background color going to be? What are some regional areas that can have cool design? So you can kind of visualize how you approach your image making in these terms also, okay? So I hope that you enjoyed this and that it became useful. I definitely think that you should find what works for you and commit to it and try to keep practicing so that way it becomes more natural. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Thank you very much.